Hey loves, my name is Amber, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to be discussing The Counselors by Jessica Goodman. Before we get too far into the review, I did want to note that while this video is not monetarily sponsored in any way, I did actually receive the book as part of a fun little package in promotion of the book, which also has this like fun little camp style brochure about the book and author that we get our book presented in. I also wanted to note that I did get an advanced copy of the book, so while that shouldn't affect the review in any way, there are liable to be some slight changes between the version that I read versus the final publicized version. There are a few trigger warnings that you should be aware of before reading the book, including overdose, car accident, paralysis, underage drinking, drunk driving, and death. So if any of these things are liable to be particularly bothersome or upsetting to you, please have discretion while watching the rest of this review or reading the book. Now, the book follows the main character, Goldie Easton, whose entire life revolves around Camp Alpine Lake. Both of her parents work there, she's grown up going there and is now a counselor at the camp herself. She's incredibly close with the owners, and her two best friends are campmates that she's grown up with since she was 8 years old. They're now about 18 or so, and they're all counselors themselves. Goldie needs this summer to go well now more than ever because this summer is following some really dramatic and upsetting events within her personal life. She was in a relationship and dating a boy that she knew through town, and they were together and very, very happy together for a while until a New Year's Eve party in which the boyfriend Heller was drunk driving and hit a classmate of theirs, leaving him paralyzed from the waist down. But because Heller had this whole life ahead of him, he just got into college, he was the town's successful boy, like he was the golden child of the town. He convinced Goldie to take the fall and say that she was driving so that he wouldn't lose everything that he had worked so hard to get, not taking into consideration that it would ruin Goldie's future. But she's young, she's in love, she says yes, so now this entire town absolutely hates her, cannot stand her. Her and Heller end up breaking up because the drama and the tension is just too high. So Goldie becomes this like social pariah. She is gonna have to repeat her last semester of school before she graduates, whereas all of her friends from camp have already graduated. Things are very weird and tense with her two best friends, Ava and Imogen, because Goldie hasn't told them any of this and they're not supposed to keep secrets from each other. And it seems like Ava and Imogen have just grown further and further apart from Goldie, and so it's a little bit of a rough go trying to get back into their normal routine and swing of things. Things get even weirder when Heller's body is found at camp, somewhere that the rest of the townsfolk aren't allowed to be. So Goldie is left devastated that the person that she's in love with, despite all of his wrongdoings, is now dead. And it kind of seems like Ava might have had something to do with it. Alright, now I know it seems that I may have given a few too many spoilers for that, but I promise like those were only like the first, I'd say maybe quarter of the book is when all of these events take place for the most part. So there's still like a whole, like the entire second half, like the entire finale, like there's so much more information and it goes so much more in depth into different things. So I really did not spoil anything for you guys if you want to read it and find the ending for yourself, like I promise. Now the book itself is told in two different timelines, then and now. Then being the chronicles of all of the events before the summer, so that includes like Goldie and Heller's relationship with each other, the New Year's Eve party and the direct aftermath of that, and all of that kind of storyline, whereas the now timeline follows this active summer, like as soon as Goldie gets to camp and the counselors start setting up and the kids come, and like it's the summer actively as it's going on. So that is our now timeline. It's told in alternating chapters, so you get a chapter of now, then, and as you read, like you're definitely left with questions here and there because obviously there are multiple mysteries that are, you know, playing out while you're reading, but you don't get left with like so many questions without answers. Like About as often as new questions come up, older questions are answered, so it's very, very easy to follow and keep yourself invested throughout reading because you are given bits of information here and there that puts things together and adds more to the timeline and the story and the background of what exactly is going on, but you still have new incoming questions as well, so that way you're like, ooh, like what's gonna happen next? And it's a very well balanced chronicling of events, I feel like. So the book really is very, very easy to read and follow. It's fairly fast paced. I will say that like the amount of different secrets that are going on and that are held between like different characters and from different characters did give me like a slight sense of anxiety that kind of heightened the further you read, but I definitely think that that adds to the atmosphere of the mystery. And I'm also very much the type of person who like doesn't like keeping secrets from different people because it just triggers anxiety. So seeing media, whether it's like books, movies, like TV shows, whatever, when it comes to like information that's withheld or secrets that are being kept, it is so like secondhand stressful for me to ingest and like follow along with. But I definitely think that it works for the particular like mystery, almost thriller horror aspects of the book. It doesn't quite fully lean into horror as much as I was personally hoping. Like, it's not quite as nefarious as I was assuming that it was going to be, especially based on like the book cover and a lot of the promotional materials. And especially coming from this particular author, Jessica Goodman. I've never personally read any of her work before, but she is very, very notorious within the young adult scene at this point in time for writing like young adult thriller and mystery novels. And I've heard that both of her books before this one were very, very good. Again, can't personally verify, but that kind of also left me a little bit too hyped for this book. Like, it was certainly a really, really good and interesting book, but I was also left just slightly disappointed because this author has been so hyped up to me in the past. I had a lot of expectations, whereas I think I would have been a little bit more content with the book had I not heard anything about the author before reading. The book does have a very, very nostalgic feel, but like not in the sense that like I was getting nostalgia from reading, but very much in the sense that like the narrative and Goldie as the main character was very caught up in the nostalgia of being at camp, which is what she considers to be home, and just reminiscing throughout the entire book because we were getting told a little bit of background context for these three best friends and their relationships to each other and some of the other counselors and the camp owners, and the entire just camp experience in general was very much told like in the moment, but also with Goldie frequently reminiscing. So we got told a lot of information about the past, but we weren't really shown very much, which isn't necessarily a bad thing in this particular context. It just made it a little bit harder for me personally to relate or really empathize with, because it's very much like Goldie telling us like, oh yeah, we're best friends and, you know, bup. But it's like we're not really getting the deepest sense of that from what we're seeing throughout the book. So I would have liked for there to have been a little bit more interactions with different characters that were kind of just subtly showing their, you know, deep and intricate relationships and backgrounds with each other. But instead we were very much just told. And normally that's something that like really kills the vibe for me, is when we're told instead of shown things. I do think, however, that it does work with this particular narrative more than it does with most other books that I've read, because we need that background context. And in this case, like, it's easier to kind of just tell you that background context instead of having a book that chronicles their entire childhoods and lives together. So I understand why it was told and presented in the way that it was. I just would have liked to have seen a little bit more current interactions that kind of backed that up and added to the narrative. This book has 61 chapters. It is a very short book. Like, literally the chapters are a few pages each, which is actually something that I personally really liked because it made it so much easier to get through and to read without it being like gigantic, like long ongoing chapters. It was very much a fast-paced, like bop, 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 we're done kind of book, in a way that made sense, especially with the alternating timelines. So it wasn't like you were stuck in any one particular one for too long. It was like, okay, here's a couple pages of what's going on now. Here's like 2 pages of context for like extra backstory. And then that was the premise for like the entire book. And I actually really liked how that was laid out. The ending of the book overall kind of felt a little bit unfinished as well. Not in the sense that anything's left open or like questions are left unanswered or anything like that. It did kind of just feel a little bit rushed, kind of like the last 10 minutes of a movie where they're trying to give you all of their reveals so you're not left with many questions after the credits. And it just kind of gives you all of the information, which I didn't necessarily understand as a book form because like you definitely had the time to be able to flesh that out and develop it a little bit more. I think that we could have probably stretched some of the reveals out through like multiple chapters and add a little bit more fluff in between, because like the whole pacing of the book is so good until those last couple of chapters, and then it's like, wow, we really got everything told to us and in a very short period of time. So I think it would have really benefited from a little bit of like fluffing and stretching out, especially considering that, like, how do I say this without spoiling anything? All right, let's say certain people admitted to certain things, which for the mystery and getting the mystery answered was very convenient, but it was way too quick for these people to admit to everything, considering the drastic measures that they took to make sure that this information wasn't found out. So it felt very much like a 180. It was like, oh, like so much dramatic shit has happened and like so many drastic measures have been taken. But when that didn't work exactly as planned, they like immediately admit to everything. And that felt a little bit uncharacteristic because it was kind of like why did we need to go to so much trouble in the, like, to begin with, if you're just going to admit to everything? So that wasn't the most satisfying ending. Like, it was definitely satisfying in the fact that we got to figure out all of the answers that we were looking for and the mystery was effectively solved. But I would have liked to have seen it stretched out a little bit, have it be like a little bit more of a fight to get the final reveals. Not even the final reveals, because the way in which things were revealed was fine. Like, the way in... Again, how do I explain it without spoiling? Like, the way in which things were revealed to certain characters as the story was going along made sense, but the way in which that information was then made widely known to other characters felt a little bit rushed and uncharacteristic. And I know that doesn't make a ton of sense unless you read it, but like if you read it, you'll know what I'm talking about. But overall, like, it was definitely a fun book and one that I would certainly read again. You know, like, with the few issues that I have, they were words. They really weren't enough to, like, have made it a bad reading experience by any means. Like, certainly not at all. It could have stood to have had a little bit more character development and just a little bit more personality, particularly behind the main character. I feel like we didn't necessarily get to know her very well because a lot of the book was like her, like there were a lot of instances of her best friends and just like different people that she works with and that were within the book were like, oh, like that's Goldie, or, you know, like that's what I love about you, or bup, 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 bup. And Goldie throughout the entire time was like, oh, I didn't realize that I was like that, or like, I must have changed so much because that's not who I am anymore, kind of. But we didn't get the most fully fleshed out sense of who she is at this point in time. And I would have loved to have seen a little bit more just personality behind her. I do think that it would also like make for a really, really good TV show that's like Pretty Little Liars meets Friday the 13th. I feel like would be absolutely fantastic to see on screen, because I think it could just be really, really fun. And I think that it would do really, really well. Like, I think it's definitely a story that people are going to be interested enough to want to see translated in an on-screen adaptation. And even for people who aren't familiar with the book, like, I just think that as a TV show, it could do so well. So, like, producers, get on it. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I had a blast hanging out with y'all. Peace.